Marcus Johnson drove slowly through his neighborhood after a long day at the office. The evening sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban streets as he headed home. At 38 years old, Marcus had built a solid reputation as a civil rights attorney in the city. Today had been particularly exhausting. Reviewing police body camera footage for hours had drained him mentally. His dark blue sedan turned onto Maple Street, just 2 blocks from his house. Marcus looked forward to a quiet dinner and maybe catching up on some reading before bed. The neighborhood was peaceful at this hour, with a few people walking their dogs or chatting in their front yards. Marcus didn't notice the police cruiser until he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer. He was driving well under the limit. Confused but calm, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, putting his car in park. What could this be about? He wondered, watching in his mirror as a white police officer stepped out of the patrol car. Marcus followed the procedure he always advised his clients to use. He placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. He rolled his window down and waited patiently as Officer Richard Wilson approached. The officer's hand rested on his holster, a detail Marcus immediately noticed. License and registration, Officer Wilson demanded without greeting or explanation. His voice was stern, his face showing no emotion. Marcus spoke in a measured, respectful tone. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer's face hardened. "I said license and registration. Now." Marcus noticed several things at once. The officer hadn't explained the reason for the stop, which was standard procedure. The officer's body language seemed unnecessarily tense. And 3 houses down, a neighbor had stepped onto their porch, watching the scene unfold. "Officer, I'm happy to provide my information, but I'd like to know the reason for the stop first," Marcus said calmly. Officer Wilson's face flushed slightly. "You're driving suspiciously in a good neighborhood. That's reason enough." The coded language wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd heard similar phrases in dozens of cases he handled over the years. Without making any sudden movements, he reached for his phone. "I'd like to record this interaction, if you don't mind," Marcus said. "Put that phone down," Officer Wilson snapped, his hand tightening on his holster. Marcus carefully placed the phone on the dashboard, making sure it was still recording. "Officer, with all due respect, I have the legal right to record our interaction." More neighbors had begun to notice the stop. An older couple paused their evening walk to observe from across the street. A young woman with a dog stood nearby, her phone also raised and recording. Marcus took a deep breath. This was a situation he had helped countless clients navigate, but experiencing it firsthand made his heart race despite his professional training. He reminded himself to stay calm and follow the same advice he gave to others. "Officer Wilson," Marcus said, reading the name tag, "I understand you're doing your job. I'm simply asking for the specific traffic violation that prompted this stop." The evening was growing darker now, and the flashing lights from the police car painted the street in alternating blue and red. Marcus knew that what happened in the next few minutes would be important, not just for him, but potentially for many others. Officer Wilson shifted his weight and leaned closer to the window. The tension in the air grew heavier with each passing second. "Step out of the vehicle," Wilson commanded, his right hand still resting on his holster. Marcus remained calm but firm. "Officer, I don't believe that's necessary. I've asked you a simple question about why I was pulled over. I'm not legally required to exit my vehicle without reasonable cause." A small crowd had gathered now. The neighbors who had been walking their dogs or chatting in their yards had stopped to watch. Some had their phones out, recording the interaction from a distance. "I said get out of the car." Wilson's voice rose. "I smell something suspicious." Marcus knew this tactic well. In his years as a civil rights attorney, he had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times in cases he had taken on. Vague claims about smelling something were often used as an excuse to search vehicles without proper cause. "Officer Wilson, I don't consent to any searches of my vehicle," Marcus stated calmly. "There is nothing illegal in my car, and I have not broken any traffic laws that I'm aware of." The officer's face reddened. "You people always think you know the law better than we do." That phrase, "you people," hung in the air. A few gasps came from the small crowd of onlookers. Marcus felt a familiar knot form in his stomach, but his face remained composed. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time for your license and registration, or I'm going to have to place you under arrest for obstructing an officer's duties. Marcus weighed his options. He knew his rights, but he also knew the reality of the situation. Escalating this encounter further could be dangerous, regardless of who was legally in the right. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached for his wallet in the inside pocket of his jacket. I'm reaching for my wallet to get my license. He narrated his actions clearly. Officer Wilson watched with narrowed eyes as Marcus pulled out his leather wallet. As he opened it, his bar association card was visible next to his driver's license. "Here's my license," Marcus said, handing it over along with his registration from the glove compartment. "And I'm still requesting to know the specific reason for this traffic stop." Wilson took the documents and studied them. His eyes widened slightly when he saw "Attorney at Law" printed on the license. He glanced at the bar association card, then back at Marcus with a new look of uncertainty. "Wait here," Wilson said, his tone noticeably different. He walked back to his patrol car, Marcus's documents in hand. From his car, Marcus could see Officer Wilson speaking into his radio. The crowd of neighbors had grown to about 10 people. An older man, whom Marcus recognized as Mr. Peterson from down the street, approached his car window. "Everything okay, Marcus?" Mr. Peterson asked. "This doesn't seem right." "I appreciate your concern," Marcus replied. "If you're comfortable doing so, please continue to observe and record the interaction." Mr. Peterson nodded and stepped back, joining the other neighbors who were watching silently. Officer Wilson returned after a few minutes, his demeanor visibly changed. He handed back Marcus's license and registration with much more care than before. "Mr. Johnson, I see you work at Johnson and Associates Civil Rights Law," Wilson said, his voice now unnaturally polite. "That's correct," Marcus replied. "I specialize in police misconduct cases, actually." The officer's face paled slightly. The tables had turned, and both men knew it. The crowd of neighbors sensed the shift too, and a few whispers spread among them. "May I now know why I was pulled over, Officer Wilson?" Marcus asked again, his voice steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through his body. Officer Wilson cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. The confident stance he had maintained earlier was gone. "There have been reports of suspicious vehicles in the area," Wilson said, his explanation sounding rehearsed. "Your car matched a general description we were given." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what description would that be, Officer Wilson? A sedan? There must be hundreds of sedans in this neighborhood alone." The growing crowd of neighbors had now formed a loose semicircle around the scene. Marcus recognized most of them, people he had waved to while getting his mail or chatted with at community meetings. Their presence provided both comfort and witnesses to whatever might happen next. "Sir, I'm just doing my job," Wilson said defensively. "We've had break-ins reported in this area." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand community safety concerns, Officer Wilson. I've lived in this neighborhood for 5 years and haven't heard about any recent break-ins. When exactly were these reported?" The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared for the question. "Recently. I don't have the exact dates on hand." Mrs. Jenkins, a retired school teacher who lived 2 houses down, stepped forward. "That's simply not true," she called out. "We haven't had any break-ins in this neighborhood for over a year. I'm the neighborhood watch coordinator, and I would know." Several other neighbors nodded in agreement. Officer Wilson's face flushed red again, but this time from embarrassment rather than anger. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor. "Officer, I believe we both know what's happening here. I was driving while black in what you called a good neighborhood. Is that correct?" Wilson straightened his uniform and avoided eye contact. "I'm not going to dignify that with a response." "You don't have to," Marcus replied. "Your actions have spoken clearly enough." A police supervisor's car pulled up behind Wilson's cruiser. Marcus recognized the vehicle immediately. It was marked with lieutenant insignia. The situation had escalated up the chain of command. Lieutenant Garcia stepped out of her vehicle and approached. Her expression was serious as she surveyed the scene. A growing crowd of concerned citizens, many with phones recording, and her officer clearly in a defensive posture. "What's the situation here, Officer Wilson?" she asked crisply. Before Wilson could answer, Marcus spoke up. Good evening, Lieutenant. I'm Marcus Johnson, a resident of this neighborhood. I was pulled over without explanation, denied information about the reason for the stop, and ordered out of my vehicle without cause. I've asked Officer Wilson multiple times to explain the specific violation that prompted this stop. Lieutenant Garcia turned to Wilson. Is this accurate, officer? Wilson straightened up. Lieutenant, I had reasonable suspicion based on. Based on what exactly? Garcia interrupted. I'll need to see your dashcam footage. The lieutenant turned back to Marcus. Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience. May I see your identification as well? Marcus handed over his license again. Lieutenant Garcia studied it briefly, her eyes widening slightly when she recognized his name. Marcus Johnson of Johnson and Associates? She asked. Marcus nodded. Yes, that's correct. The lieutenant handed his license back immediately. Mr. Johnson, I'm familiar with your work. You represented the Williams family last year, didn't you? I did, Marcus confirmed. The Williams case had been a high-profile police misconduct suit that had led to department-wide policy changes. The crowd of neighbors murmured. Many now realized why this traffic stop felt so significant. They were watching a civil rights attorney experience the very kind of profiling he fought against in court. Lieutenant Garcia turned to address Officer Wilson again, speaking in a low, serious tone. The conversation wasn't audible to Marcus or the onlookers, but Wilson's posture became increasingly rigid as the lieutenant spoke. Lieutenant Garcia finished speaking with Officer Wilson and returned to Marcus's car window. The crowd of neighbors remained in place, many still recording with their phones. The evening had grown darker, and the police lights cast strange, shifting colors across everyone's faces. Mr. Johnson, the lieutenant began, I've reviewed the initial information with Officer Wilson. I want to assure you that we take complaints about officer conduct very seriously. Marcus nodded but remained silent. Years of courtroom experience had taught him when to speak and when to listen. I understand you're a civil rights attorney, Lieutenant Garcia continued. So you know how these situations should be handled properly. I do, Marcus replied calmly. And I also know that what happened here tonight is unfortunately common. The difference is that most people stopped this way don't have my legal background or resources. Wilson stood awkwardly by his patrol car, watching the conversation. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely. Officer Wilson says he observed you making an improper stop at the intersection back there, Lieutenant Garcia said, pointing behind them. Marcus shook his head. That's interesting, because he didn't mention any traffic violation when he first approached my vehicle. If I had committed a violation, why wouldn't that be the first thing he stated? Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Mrs. Jenkins spoke up again from the sidelines. I saw Marcus drive by my house just before he was pulled over, she called out. He was driving perfectly normally. I testified to that. Another neighbor, a young man named Tyler who lived across the street, stepped forward. I have the whole thing on video, from when Marcus turned onto the street until the officer pulled him over. There was no traffic violation. Lieutenant Garcia looked from the neighbors to Marcus, then back to Officer Wilson, who was now staring at his boots. Mr. Johnson, the lieutenant said, turning back to Marcus, would you be willing to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement about this incident? Of course, Marcus replied. And I'll be bringing copies of all the video evidence that's being collected here tonight. He gestured to the crowd of neighbors with their phones out. For the first time, a hint of a smile crossed Marcus's face. I'm also planning to use this incident in the community workshop I'm conducting next weekend about citizens' rights during police encounters. Perhaps your department would like to send a representative to participate. It could be a positive step toward building better community relations. Lieutenant Garcia looked surprised, but quickly recovered. That's actually not a bad idea, Mr. Johnson. I'll bring it up with the chief. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. My contact information. I look forward to discussing this further. The lieutenant took the card and nodded. She turned to the crowd. Folks, I understand your concern for your neighbor, but I'd ask you to return to your homes now. The situation is under control. No one moved. Instead, Mr. Peterson spoke up from the group. We'll disperse when Mr. Johnson is safely on his way home. Marcus felt a wave of emotion at the solidarity his neighbors were showing. This was community in its purest form. People standing together against injustice, even when it would have been easier to look away. Lieutenant Garcia seemed to understand that pushing the issue would only make things worse. Very well. Mr. Johnson, you're free to go. We'll expect you at the station tomorrow. I'll be there, Marcus confirmed. And Lieutenant Garcia, I hope this becomes a learning opportunity, not just for Officer Wilson, but for your entire department. The lieutenant nodded curtly and walked back to Officer Wilson. She spoke to him briefly, and then both officers returned to their vehicles. As the police cars pulled away, the neighbors approached Marcus's car. The atmosphere shifted from tension to relief, though everyone understood the significance of what had just occurred. "Are you okay, Marcus?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, concern evident in her voice. "I am," he said, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. "But this isn't over. This is just the beginning." After the police cars disappeared around the corner, the neighbors gathered closer to Marcus's vehicle. The blue and red flashing lights were gone, but the energy of what had just happened still hung in the air. "That was something else," Tyler said, shaking his head. "I got the whole thing on video, start to finish." Marcus stepped out of his car, finally able to breathe normally again. Despite his professional experience with similar cases, being on the receiving end of racial profiling had left him shaken. He took a moment to collect himself before addressing the small crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he said sincerely. "What you did tonight, standing witness, recording what happened, that made a real difference." Mrs. Jenkins approached and gave Marcus a quick hug. "We weren't going to let them intimidate you, dear. Not in our neighborhood." Marcus smiled, genuinely touched by the support. "I'd like to gather all the video footage if you're willing to share it. It will be important for what comes next." The neighbors nodded in agreement. Several people began sending their videos to Marcus's phone right away. "You know," said Mr. Peterson, "I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I've seen things like this happen before. But nobody ever did anything about it." Marcus nodded. "That's often the case. People feel powerless against the system, especially when they don't know their rights." As the group talked, a car pulled up and parked across the street. A woman stepped out quickly, concern etched on her face. It was Amara, Marcus's wife and fellow attorney at their law firm. "Marcus," she called, rushing over. "Mrs. Jenkins called me. Are you okay?" Marcus embraced his wife. "I'm fine. Just another day being black in America," he said with a sad smile. Amara looked at the gathered neighbors and then back at her husband. "What happened exactly?" Marcus gave her the short version while the neighbors occasionally chimed in with details. Amara's expression shifted from concern to anger and finally to determination. "This is exactly why we do the work we do," she said firmly. "And now they brought it right to our doorstep." Tyler, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "So what happens now? Will anything actually change?" Marcus looked at the young man thoughtfully. "That depends on what we do next. Change doesn't just happen, it's made to happen by people who refuse to accept injustice." "We're with you, whatever you need," Mrs. Jenkins assured him. "This isn't just your fight." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Tomorrow, I'll go to the station and file a formal complaint. I'll request the dashcam footage and Officer Wilson's record. If there's a pattern of behavior, it needs to be addressed." "Do you think they'll actually discipline him?" asked an older man who lived a few houses down. "Honestly, it's unlikely without significant pressure," Marcus admitted. "But this isn't just about punishing one officer. It's about changing the culture and policies that make these incidents common." Amara, who had been checking the videos neighbors had shared, looked up. "These recordings are clear as day, Marcus. There was no probable cause for that stop." Marcus nodded. "That's important evidence, but even more important is all of you being willing to speak up." As the neighbors talked, Marcus felt his professional armor falling back into place. The initial shock and anger were being channeled into something more productive, a plan for accountability and change. "I'm holding a workshop next weekend on citizen rights during police encounters," Marcus announced to the group. "I'd like to invite all of you. The more people who know their rights, the harder it is for those rights to be violated." Several neighbors immediately agreed to attend. Others promised to spread the word throughout the community. As the gathering slowly dispersed, Marcus and Amara stayed behind, talking quietly with each other. What had begun as a frightening and humiliating experience was transforming into something powerful, a catalyst for the very change Marcus had been fighting for in courtrooms for years. The next morning, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the video footage his neighbors had shared. Amara sat beside him, taking notes as they watched each clip carefully. Sunlight streamed through the windows, contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere of the previous night. "This one from Tyler is particularly clear," Amara said, pointing to the laptop screen. "You can see your complete drive down the street, the proper stop at the sign, and then Wilson's lights coming on with no apparent cause." Marcus nodded. "And Mrs. Jenkins' video captures his approach and the initial conversation perfectly. You can clearly hear that he never stated a reason for the stop." They had compiled a folder with all the evidence. 12 different videos from various angles, written statements from 8 neighbors, and Marcus's own detailed account of the incident. It was more documentation than most victims of police misconduct ever had access to. "What time is your appointment at the station?" Amara asked. Marcus checked his watch. 10 o'clock. Lieutenant Garcia arranged it herself. "Are you sure you don't want me to come as your attorney?" Amara asked, concern evident in her voice. Marcus smiled at his wife. "I think I can handle it. Besides, I want them to see me as a community member filing a complaint, not just as a lawyer bringing a case." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Marcus answered and was surprised to hear the voice of Jerome Williams, the client whose police misconduct case he had won the previous year. "Marcus, I just heard what happened to you," Jerome said. "It's all over social media." Marcus sighed. "News travels fast, I guess." "The community is behind you, man," Jerome continued. "People are organizing. There's talk about a demonstration at the police station this afternoon." A demonstration? Marcus hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. "Jerome, I appreciate the support, but I want to follow the proper channels first." "That's your right," Jerome replied. "But people are tired of waiting for the system to fix itself. What happened to you is happening to folks without your credentials every day." After finishing the call, Marcus sat quietly for a moment. Jerome had a point. His case was getting attention because of who he was, but countless others faced similar or worse treatment without any recourse. "What are you thinking?" Amara asked, recognizing the thoughtful expression on her husband's face. "I'm thinking this isn't just about filing a complaint anymore," Marcus replied. "This is an opportunity to push for real change." At 10 o'clock sharp, Marcus walked into the police station carrying a folder of evidence. The front desk officer recognized him immediately. "Mr. Johnson, Lieutenant Garcia is expecting you. Please follow me." Marcus was led to a conference room rather than an interview room, a small but meaningful sign of respect. Lieutenant Garcia was waiting, along with a man Marcus recognized as Captain Thomas Reynolds, the precinct commander. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming," Captain Reynolds said, extending his hand. "We've reviewed the initial reports of last night's incident, and I want to personally assure you that we take these matters very seriously." Marcus shook the captain's hand firmly. "I appreciate that, Captain Reynolds. I brought documentation that I believe will help clarify exactly what occurred." Before Marcus could open his folder, Captain Reynolds spoke again. "Before we begin, I should inform you that Officer Wilson has been placed on administrative duty, pending a full investigation." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised by the swift action. "That's unexpected, but appropriate." Furthermore, Lieutenant Garcia added, "We've pulled all of Officer Wilson's stop records for the past year. There appears to be a concerning pattern that warrants further examination." Marcus hadn't expected this level of cooperation. He had prepared for resistance, for excuses, for the thin blue line to protect one of their own. This proactive approach caught him off guard. "I'm pleased to hear that," Marcus said cautiously. "But I have to ask, is this standard procedure, or am I receiving special treatment because of my profession?" Captain Reynolds and Lieutenant Garcia exchanged a look. "Mr. Johnson," the captain said finally, "I won't pretend your status hasn't influenced the speed of our response. But sometimes it takes a high-profile case to create momentum for change that should have happened long ago." "I understand, Captain Reynolds," Marcus replied, placing his folder of evidence on the conference room table. but we both know that every person deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of their profession or status. Captain Reynolds nodded solemnly. You're right, of course, and that's part of what I want to discuss with you today. Lieutenant Garcia opened a laptop and turned it toward Marcus. We pulled the dashcam footage from Officer Wilson's patrol car. Would you like to review it? For the next 20 minutes, they watched the footage together. The video confirmed exactly what Marcus and his neighbors had documented. There was no traffic violation, no reasonable suspicion for the stop. When the recording ended, the room fell silent. This is clear-cut, Lieutenant Garcia said finally. There was no legal basis for the stop. Outside the conference room window, Marcus noticed increased activity in the station lobby. A small crowd had gathered, holding handmade signs. He recognized several of his neighbors among them, along with Jerome Williams and other community members. Captain Reynolds noticed Marcus's attention shift to the window. It seems you have supporters, Mr. Johnson. I didn't organize this, Marcus said honestly. We know, the captain replied. This is a community response. People are tired of these incidents. Marcus turned back to face the captain. Then let's talk about real solutions. Officer Wilson's case is important, but addressing one officer doesn't fix the systemic issues. For the next hour, Marcus outlined specific policy reforms. Mandatory body cameras for all officers, transparent data collection on traffic stops with demographic information, improved de-escalation training, and a civilian review board with actual authority. To his surprise, Captain Reynolds didn't dismiss these ideas outright. Instead, he took notes and asked thoughtful questions. Lieutenant Garcia even suggested additional measures based on her own observations from within the department. These are good ideas, Mr. Johnson, Captain Reynolds said when Marcus finished. Some are already in development, others would require approval from higher up, but all deserve serious consideration. Marcus leaned forward. I appreciate your openness, Captain, but the community needs more than consideration. They need action and accountability. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. An officer entered and whispered something to Captain Reynolds. The crowd outside has grown, the captain explained after the officer left, and the local news has arrived. They're requesting a statement. Marcus hadn't expected media attention so quickly. What do you plan to tell them? Captain Reynolds thought for a moment. The truth, that an unjustified traffic stop occurred, that we're taking it seriously, and that we're committed to making necessary changes. Words are important, but insufficient, Marcus replied. The community has heard promises before. Lieutenant Garcia spoke up. What if we announce some immediate actions? The body camera program we've been planning could be implemented next month instead of next quarter, and we could commit to releasing stop data publicly on a monthly basis. Captain Reynolds considered this. Those are steps I have the authority to take. He turned to Marcus. Would you be willing to join me for this announcement? Your presence would lend credibility. Marcus weighed his options carefully. Working with the department could be seen as selling out by some, but it could also create a path for real reform. I'll join you, Marcus decided, but I'll also be clear that this is just the beginning. The community will be watching to ensure these promises are kept. When Marcus and Captain Reynolds stepped outside to address the crowd and the media, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Seeing them standing together, the civil rights attorney and the police captain, created a powerful image. Marcus spotted Amara in the crowd, who had apparently joined the gathering. She gave him an encouraging nod as he approached the microphone set up by the news crews. This wasn't how Marcus had planned to spend his day, but sometimes the most important cases found you, rather than the other way around. As the cameras focused on him, he took a deep breath and prepared to transform his personal experience into a catalyst for change. 6 months had passed since that fateful traffic stop. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness as Marcus stood at the podium in the community center gymnasium. The room was packed with over 200 people, community members, police officers, local officials, and media representatives. Today marks an important milestone, Marcus began, his voice carrying throughout the space. But it's not the end of our journey, it's just the beginning. Behind him on the stage sat Captain Reynolds, Lieutenant Garcia, and several community leaders. A large screen displayed the title, Community Police Accountability Initiative, 6-Month Progress Report. When I was unjustly stopped in my own neighborhood half a year ago, I had two choices, Marcus continued. I could pursue my own case and seek justice only for myself, or I could use that experience to push for wider change. With your support, we chose the latter path. The crowd nodded in agreement. Many of them had been part of this journey from the start, from the neighbors who witnessed the original incident to the community members who joined the oversight committee that followed. Officer Richard Wilson resigned from the force, Marcus stated matter-of-factly. That was his personal decision after the internal investigation confirmed a pattern of biased policing. But this was never about just one officer. Marcus clicked to the next slide, which showed statistics from the newly implemented traffic stop database, information that had never before been available to the public. In the first month of data collection, black drivers were 6 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers in our district. Today, 3 months after implementing our new policies, that disparity has been reduced by over 60%. A murmur ran through the crowd. The numbers were powerful evidence that change was possible. Every officer now wears a body camera, and footage is retained for 1 year, Marcus continued. The Civilian Review Board has reviewed 28 complaints and recommended action in 17 cases. And most importantly, officers have completed over 2,000 hours of de-escalation and anti-bias training. Captain Reynolds stepped up to the microphone next. These changes haven't always been easy, he admitted. Change rarely is, but they've made our department better and our community safer. From her seat in the front row, Amara watched her husband with pride. What had begun as a frightening and humiliating experience had transformed into something powerful and lasting. After the formal presentation ended, people gathered in small groups around the room. Officer trainees spoke with community members about their experiences. Data analysts explained the new transparency measures to interested citizens. Lieutenant Garcia led a demonstration of the body camera technology. Marcus found himself speaking with a young black teenager named Deshaun and his mother. I got stopped last week while riding my bike, Deshaun told Marcus. But it was different from before. The officer explained why he stopped me right away. He was respectful. And when I asked if I could call my mom, he said yes. Deshaun's mother added, it wasn't perfect, but it was better. And I know who to contact if there had been a problem. That matters. As the event wound down, Marcus stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The setting sun cast long shadows across the community center parking lot. Mrs. Jenkins approached, leaning on her cane. You did good, Marcus, she said simply. Real change takes time, but this is a start. Marcus smiled at his neighbor. It only happened because people like you were willing to stand up and be counted. That's how change always happens, she replied. One person stands up, then another, and another. Pretty soon, you have a movement. As Marcus looked back at the community center, where people who might never have spoken to each other 6 months ago were now engaged in meaningful conversation, he felt cautiously optimistic. The system wasn't fixed, far from it. Inequalities and biases ran deep, but something had shifted in their community. What began with one racist traffic stop had sparked a movement for accountability and transparency. It wasn't just about Marcus Johnson, civil rights lawyer. It was about creating a system where every person, regardless of their title or profession, could expect to be treated with dignity and respect. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and for many days to come. But today, in this moment, Marcus allowed himself to feel that most precious of emotions, hope.